Putin's shadow soldiers. Russia's army is known to be one of the largest armies on this planet, with an estimated military personnel of over 1.3 million in total. This country is not a lightweight by any means, but this is not the whole truth. Putin holds a secret he doesn't want the world to know about. Let's decode Putin's shadow soldiers, the Wagner Group. Early 2022, small groups of men start arriving in Ukraine from Africa. They are there on holiday to visit family and friends. They speak Ukrainian, they look Ukrainian, and some of them even carry Ukrainian passports. They blend in perfectly, but there's one problem. Nothing I told you about these men is true. They're not Ukrainian. They're not students or businessmen coming to visit their friends and family. They are undercover Russian mercenaries, and their objective is to assassinate Vladimir Alexandrovich Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and cut off the head of the Ukrainian government. Whoever can kill Zelensky first will receive a very large bounty and return to Russia as a hero. These soldiers look and sound Ukrainian and work for a company called the Wagner Group. If you have never heard of the Wagner Group before, it's for a good reason. They are shadow soldiers, hired by a secretive private military contractor group. These soldiers are unmarked and anonymous. They fly with no flag, and many of them are ex-Russian special forces. Rumor has it, the Wagner Group works for the Russian government on behalf of Putin himself. For an entire 5 weeks before Russia officially invaded Ukraine, 400 of these Wagner mercenaries were already operating behind enemy lines. These assassins wasted no time. In less than a week after the invasion started, Zelensky avoided 3 assassination attempts, with 2 of those coming from Wagner mercenaries. Besides destabilizing the Ukrainian government, these mercenaries have been doing the Kremlin's bidding all over the world, including Syria, Sudan, Libya, Venezuela, Mozambique, and more. Since they're unmarked, they don't have to worry about human rights or collateral damage, leaving a trail of war crimes behind them. This is the Wagner Group, the most secretive private military group in the world, the shadow soldiers of the Kremlin. Private military contractors, or PMCs, are nothing new. Blackwater, now known as Academy, was the most well-known controversial American PMC in the world. But the main difference between Blackwater and the Wagner Group is that the Wagner Group doesn't technically exist. As far as we know, it's led by a guy named Dmitry Yukin, an ex-Russian Special Forces officer. He's rumored to be a neo-Nazi and a heavy Hitler fan, which is why Wagner, the name of Hitler's favorite composer, became the name of this organization. The Wagner Group as a PMC doesn't actually exist in Russia. It's actually illegal to run a private military contractor company in Russia, so instead, the Wagner Group is registered in Argentina, and instead of having employees, Wagner is just an umbrella name for dozens of different Russian PMCs. They get their money from one guy, Yevgeny Prigozhin, also known as Putin's chef. Yes, like an actual cooking chef. Yevgeny Prigozhin is a Russian oligarch and a recent addition to the FBI's most wanted list. He is believed to be the real owner of the Wagner Group, and although he's always denied association for obvious reasons, he is the money man, and wherever Wagner goes, he makes sure to fill their pockets with everything they need. Together, Yukin and Prigozhin created this organization of Russian mercenaries. Whatever the Russian government needs them to do will be done, and Putin avoids getting accused of committing acts of war against sovereign countries. Remember, PMCs are illegal in Russia. The Russian government obviously can't be held responsible for something an illegal organization did. Plus, the Wagner Group isn't even registered in Russia. The connection between the Russian government and Wagner is hazy at most, except for the fact that the Wagner Group regularly uses Russian military aircraft. Its mercenaries get treated in Russian military hospitals, and Yevgeny Prigozhin and Vladimir Putin are pretty much best friends. The Wagner Group is literally there for Putin to outsource his dirty work. Ukraine, February 20, 2014. Russian troops crossed the border into Crimea, the Ukrainian peninsula. They're here to stake Russia's claim on the territory. Luckily, most residents of Crimea are Russian, so they don't pose a threat. But in between the sea of smiling Russian soldiers and marked uniforms were men in plain green unmarked uniforms. They're not smiling as they move through the cities, securing borders and checkpoints. In fact, their faces are completely covered. These were the original Wagner mercenaries, later called Little Green Men. They are there to make sure nothing goes wrong. Luckily, the takeover of Crimea was effortless. But in case things got out of hand, the Wagner Group was there to do what official Russian soldiers couldn't, to make sure that Russia didn't lose. Dmitry Yukin was one of those green men back in 2014. After they took over Crimea, war broke out in the eastern region of Ukraine, Donbass, and around 300 mercenaries moved from Crimea to Donbass. They were Putin's insurance, his backup plan if anyone showed any sort of resistance. They stayed in Ukraine for almost a year, waiting for something to go wrong, for a chance to get in the fights. But they couldn't get their chance until 2015, when Putin suddenly needed help in Syria. The presence of the Wagner Group in Syria was first reported in late October 2015, almost a month after the start of the Russian military intervention in Syria's civil war. The reason we know this is because between 3 and 9 Wagner mercenaries were killed in a rebel mortar attack on their position in Latakia province. According to a few Wagner fighters, they were flown to Syria aboard Russian military transport planes. Others were transported to Syria by the Syrian Chamwings airline from the Rostov-on-Don airport, with 51 round trips being made between January 2017 and March 2018. Their equipment was delivered to Syria via the so-called Syrian Express, a fleet of Russian military and civilian merchant ships that had been delivering supplies to Syria since 2012. Later, a defense ministry source told a Russian news channel, RBK-TV, that the Federal Security Service of the Russian Federation, so-called FSB, was also directing the Wagner Group. The usage of Wagner had reportedly cost Russia $170 million by August 2016. I can't tell you about all the horrific stuff the Shadow Soldiers have done through the years. It's just too much. And a lot we will probably never know about. But I will highlight the story about Hamdi from Syria. It's a good example to get the understanding of the dark deeds these soldiers did and probably still do. Hamdi was not the kind of man to look for trouble. When things in Syria started getting bad in 2011, he decided to flee to Lebanon. His wife and children would be safe in Syria, but if he stayed, there was a chance he would be forced to join the Syrian army and fight against the rebels. If he was forced to fight, there's a big chance he would die in combat, and who would care for his kids? who would make sure they had money. So for almost 6 years, he stayed put in Lebanon, away from his family, regularly sending money to his wife, and dreaming of the day he could go back home and hug his wife and kids. Then, right before a major religious holiday in 2017, his mother died. Being a family man, he decided it was time to visit home, except he never got a chance to do any of that. Instead, as he reached the capital of Syria, Damascus, he was detained by Syrian soldiers. When they found out he fled in 2011, they informed him that he would have to join the army. His worst fears were coming true. He would have to fight against his own countrymen, and no one would be there to take care of his family. So he hatched a plan. Once he reached the army base, he would just run. He didn't know the area well, but he didn't care. He would just keep running until he found someone who could help, and that's exactly what he did. The only problem was, Hamdi underestimated how far he had to run. But he kept going. Exhausted and dehydrated, he ran until he saw a camp in the distance. He was saved. He was going to make it. Relief flooded his body as he ran into the camp, calling out in Arabic, the only language he knew. Except the people in the camp weren't Syrian. In fact, they weren't Arabic at all. They spoke a language he couldn't understand and pointed guns in his face. Hamdi had just stumbled into a Wagner Group camp outside of a gas plant. There was no coincidence that the Wagner Group had their camp just outside a gas plant. 2 years earlier, Russia had made a deal with the Syrian government. For every oil or gas plant they freed from rebel control, certain Russian companies would receive 25% of the plant's earnings. The plants where the Wagner Group was stationed had become a money machine for a company called Evropolis. Coincidentally, Evropolis is directly linked to none other than Yevgeny Prigozhin, the owner of the Wagner Group. So when Hamdi Buta ran into their camp that day, he never expected what would happen next. Instead of helping him, or trying to understand his story, or even just arresting him, the Wagner Mercenaries did much worse. They accused him of being part of ISIS, and their justification was that he could only speak Arabic. The things they did to him are so horrific that it could be taken straight out of a horror movie. I cannot tell you about it in this video, or else I will be demonetized, but sadly, it is a true story. I suggest you search for his name, and you can read for yourself. What I can say is that he was killed in the most brutal way while they filmed it. While Russia claims it's only giving Syria aerial support, the EU Council later found Yevgeny Prigozhin had personally ordered the mercenaries to do what they did and get it on camera, and Syria was not their only customer. Who do you call when you've just overthrown your country's governments and need to make sure your coup doesn't get couped? You don't want to get overthrown by someone else while there's still a power vacuum. You call Wagner Group, of course. Just like President Assad of Syria, the governments of African countries like Mali, Sudan, and the Central African Republic, they all use Wagner mercenaries to stay in power. The Wagner Group operates in many areas with heavy conflicts around the world, but it doesn't come without casualties. Since the war in Donbass in 2014 until present day, it has been confirmed that over 400 shadow soldiers have been killed, but it's estimated that over 3,500 in total have been killed. Over 3,000 mercenaries have died since the Russian invasion of Ukraine started on February 24th, 2022, and it's still ongoing. Families of killed fighters of the Wagner Group are prohibited from talking to the media under a non-disclosure agreement that is a prerequisite for them to get compensation from the company. The standard compensation for the family of a killed Wagner employee is up to 5 million rubles, or about $80,000, according to a Wagner official. contrast, the girlfriend of a killed fighter stated the families are paid between $22,500 and $52,000, depending on the killed PMC's rank and mission. There are a lot of secrets in this world, and many of them will never rise to the surface. But now at least you know more about the Wagner Group, Putin's shadow soldiers. And there is little doubt that the Wagner Group is the world's most bloodthirsty secret PMCs, and they're not going to give away that title anytime soon. Thank you for watching this video, and subscribe for more videos about our amazing world.